Welcome to our last virtual preview of the San Francisco Fall Opera Season. I'm Peggy Hill, the Vice President of Chapters of the San Francisco Opera Guild. The chapters include the East Bay, the Peninsula, Sonoma, and Marin. We owe a special thanks to John Morris, Education Manager for the San Francisco Opera Guild. He is the tech, the organizer, and as I see it, the magician who makes it possible for all of us to attend a virtual preview. Today's preview presenter is Rebecca Plack, University of California, Davis, music lecturer, professor, and singer. She will help us grasp the complexities and contradictions of both the music and the story of Mozart's Così fan tutte. We will learn new and insightful ways of thinking about this opera's mixture of betrayal and belief. Welcome, Rebecca Plack. And is it true? Quote unquote, so do they all.
It's a complicated question, Peggy. Maybe it's a simple question, but it has a complicated answer.
All right.
So we'll get into that though today. Thank you for asking. And thank you for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for coming today. I'm delighted that we can all be here together, even virtually here on Zoom. And I'll go ahead and get started with my presentation. Here we go. This is the set design for the production of Così that you'll all be attending, I imagine, in the coming weeks. And we'll be talking a little bit about the production at the end, I think. I would like to invite you, if you have questions during the lecture, to please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. The questions will all be collected by John Morris. You can submit them at any time during the talk, and then he'll collate them and ask them during the Q&A session at the end. But for now, let's go ahead and get started talking about Così. As I said to Peggy, it's complicated. Of the three operas that Mozart collaborated on with the librettist Lorenzo da Ponte, Così fan tutte is widely regarded as the most problematic. Their first effort, Marriage of Figaro, has clear heroes and clear villains, and the villains are all redeemed by the end of the opera in the traditional happy ending of an opera buffa, a comic opera. As for the Mozart and da Ponte's second collaboration, Don Giovanni, it's considerably darker, but over time, its anti-hero, Don Giovanni himself, Don Juan, became accepted as an affable rake, excused for his bad behavior. And so when I began my studies of opera, first at the university and later in opera summer programs and at conservatory, I didn't have that much connection with Così fan tutte. It didn't grab me the way the other Mozart operas did. And the scenes that we studied in school were mostly from Figaro and Don Giovanni and from the Magic Flute, with occasional scenes from Così, but it just wasn't really a part of my world, my opera world, my Mozart world, in the way that these other operas were. And when I finally did see Così in the 90s, I just didn't get it. So years later, when I finally got to know the opera, I understood why. Così is very much a product of its time, and its layers of meaning are dependent on a kaleidoscope of contexts, the contexts in which it was created. So I'll explore a few of those today as we talk. And here's an overview of how I'm going to cover them. The first part of my talk will be about, well, it'll be an overview of characters and plot, which we need in order to get started in Mozart's life. And then we'll talk about the presence of the sentimental in the opera. Sentimental here used in the same sense as the novel Sense and Sensibility, a finely cultivated sentiment, an emotional sensibility, a degree of sensitivity, if you will, that is a really important context for the opera. In the second part, we'll talk about mesmerism. Those of you who are familiar with the opera, and I imagine some of you are very familiar with the opera, and that there must be some of you for whom Così is fairly new. but mesmerism features in the Act 1 finale of the opera, and we'll look at that scene carefully and talk about its creation. And then finally, Peggy mentioned that I'm a singer, and I'm also a voice teacher, and singing and the history of pedagogy is a large part of my research. So I'll talk a little bit about the voices in Così and what they were historically, what they were for Mozart, what they have become for us, different ways that they can function, things like that. So a brief intro first to Mozart during this time. He probably began work on Così during the autumn of 1789. He was 33 years old, almost 34 at the time, though this is only a couple of years before he would die. So it's quite near the end of his life. Now, in the fall of 1789, his outlook was probably more positive than it had been in recent years. His finances were a little better. Mozart always struggled with money while he was in Vienna the entire time he was there. He'd recently returned from a short concert tour of Leipzig, Berlin, and Dresden. And while away, he'd become reacquainted with the music of Johann Sebastian Bach and immersed himself in that. Then when he returned, he had some work. He had some string quartets that he was publishing, and he got some extra work in the form of commissions to write what were called replacement arias for singers who were performing in revivals of operas, but who didn't like the arias that had originally been written for other singers, and they wanted new arias to be written for them, and Mozart was asked. So he had a little extra money in his pocket, and he had plenty of work, which made him happy. Now, beyond that, Mozart has left very little direct evidence of the genesis of Così fan tutte beyond the manuscript itself, which I'll discuss briefly at the end. And the reason for this is likely that he and Da Ponte, the librettist, were both in Vienna for the duration of the compositional process, which was remarkably fast, even for Mozart. And it's partly for this reason that, save for a couple of brief mentions in letters to a patron, Mozart does not discuss Così at all in his correspondence. And so Mozart's correspondence is often a way that we know what he was thinking about what he was working on. He certainly didn't text daily or email or those sorts of things. So what we know about Così comes from the work itself and from all that we can glean about the social context in which Mozart and Da Ponte wrote it. So with that, let's introduce our cast. This is a still from the Met production of Così from I think 2017, 2018 season. The tenor pictured is Ben Bliss, who'll be singing here in San Francisco. It's a carefully shaped theater piece that involves just 6 characters. So these are 2 sisters named Fiordiligi and Dorabella. And pictured on the other side of the door here is their maid, whose name is Despina. And then the other characters are their fiancés, boyfriends, Ferrando and Guillermo. We'll talk about his name later too, but I'm going to spell it and pronounce it Guillermo for now. So Ferrando and Guillermo. And then also a fellow who calls himself a philosopher. His name is Don Alfonso. He's a friend of theirs. He's kind of an informal advisor, if you will. He's older than they are. And anyway, initially the couples, I said that sisters and their boyfriends. So initially the couples are Dorabella and Ferrando and Fiordiligi and Guillermo. This is important to know because if you are familiar with Così, you know that over the course of the opera, the couples switch, which is the crux of the plot. And I thought I'd go ahead and read the plot synopsis, and might as well read the one from the San Francisco Opera website because that's the one that we're all going to have in a few days. It begins with an overview. Best friends Guillermo and Ferrando are so convinced of their fiance's devotion that they're willing to gamble on it, disguising themselves as strangers to test the women's fidelity. Here we go. Act 1. Don Alfonso is trying to enlighten Ferrando and Guillermo as to the true nature of women. He places a bet that he can prove their fiancés, Dorabella and Fiordiligi, are not the icons of purity the young men believe them to be. Both sides are confident of victory within 24 hours. 24 hours is a thing in these operas. The Marriage of Figaro also takes place in 24 hours, and I believe Don Giovanni does as well. And during this period, Ferrando and Guillermo agree to do as they are told by Don Alfonso. The next scene sees the sisters celebrating the virtues of their lovers when Don Alfonso crashes in and tells them that their men have been called up and must leave immediately for the front lines. This maybe harkens to wars on the Turkish front that the Emperor of the Holy Roman Emperor is thinking about waging, and other things as well. 1789 is the year that began the French Revolution. Anyway, the men have been called up. The men feign a tearful farewell scene and go off to war. The women are devastated, but their maid Despina tells them to look on the bright side and have a good time in their absence. Don Alfonso enlists Despina in his scheme, and he presents the two men in disguise as Albanian friends to the sisters, who don't recognize them. But they're offended and repelled by their advances. They declare fidelity to their lovers. The sisters continue to grieve for their men at the front, and this now is the Act 1 finale. The two Albanians return, and despondent in the women's rejection, they swallow poison and collapse. The terrified girls call for Despina, who goes to find a doctor who claims to cure any illness by magnetism. Remember magnetism, we're going to talk about it again. The men revive, and believing they're in heaven, they demand a kiss from their angels, but the sisters rebuff them again. Act 2 begins. Despina persuades the sisters to befriend their new admirers. And this is the point at which they switch. And Dorabella chooses Guillermo, Fiordiligi selects Ferrando. Dorabella quickly yields to Guillermo, but it takes a little longer for Fiordiligi to yield to Ferrando. Ultimately, she does in front of Guillermo, who witnesses the entire thing. At the end, the Act 2 finale, Don Alfonso and Despina arrange for the new couples to be married. And as the girls sign their names, a military band is heard signaling the soldiers have returned. The Albanians leave, and then the original boyfriends return, but without their disguises. And they're shocked, and everyone's horrified. And then the entire plot is revealed. All four lovers' certainties have been destroyed, and no one knows quite what to believe, except that human nature is far more complex than they ever imagined. I wonder if this program note signals the direction that the director is going to take in the production of Così that's opening this week. The plot is problematic in many ways. Among them, deception, misogyny, deception fueled by misogyny, and manipulation, which all lead to the culminating infidelity. And much has been written to explain all of this away. Here's a recent example. It's from an online note to last year's hilarious parody, COVID Fan Tutte, which I imagine some of you have seen. The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni, based on French plays, deal with serious issues through Italian opera buffa, mainly focusing on the society and its morals. The last of the three of the Mozart da Ponte collaborations is different. It's a light-hearted comedy based on da Ponte's original story. So that's one argument, that Così just isn't meant to be taken seriously. The other main argument is this that I've highlighted at the bottom, that Mozart's sublime music saves da Ponte's terrible, subpar wretched. It's called All Kinds of Things, subpar libretto. However, what I'd like to demonstrate today is that the libretto is a product of its time that became obscured as revivals lost touch with the original context. So the plot reflects 18th century Enlightenment values, particularly an attempt to reconcile love with reason. This is where Don Alfonso is coming from. But also, it's trying to reconcile those Enlightenment values with a culture of sensibility. And then also there are sources for the libretto that suggest that some of the characters and one character especially and the plot were intrinsically linked with actual people who were known within the Mozart da Ponte circle. So the criticism then of Così that the libretto was terrible, that it was immoral or amoral. It was a product of 19th century views of morality, not 18th century ones. These views of morality were deeply sexist, requiring women to behave one way and men to behave, allowing men to behave another, as evidenced by our gradual acceptance of Don Giovanni, of Don Juan, right? That critics have excused the male philanderer as an affable rake, but there's no pardon for Fiordiligi and Dorabella, who are deliberately tricked by their own fiancés. These ideas make me profoundly uncomfortable, and I think it's one of the reasons why it took me a long time to come to Così, because Così makes me really uncomfortable too. But the contemporary sources do offer essential clues to the real aims of its creators, which help a little bit. What are those sources? Well, here's a playbill of the first performance. I've circled here the words Ein komisches Singspiel. The German here is translated by Mozart and da Ponte in their own working materials as una dramma giocoso. They don't call it an opera buffa. It's not an opera buffa to them. It's this other thing, una dramma giocoso, which translates in English as a dramedy. A dramedy. Well, a dramedy is an uncomfortable drama, right? It's that Mozart and da Ponte never imagined that people would think of Così as lighthearted entertainment, nor did they imagine that people would be shocked and offended by it, but they imagined something in between. So to the extent that you take it seriously, it's a drama that contains plenty of humor. And to the extent that you think it's ironic farce, it makes you squirm. We could call it a squirm comedy. In other words, it's not meant merely to entertain. It's meant to make you uncomfortable. And the sentimental education that I'm going to trace now through plenty of music and video is an education that lays bare both the opera's adherence to a culture of sentiment and its reckoning with it, its gradual dismantling of it. The video clips I'm going to show you in service of this goal are taken from a 1990s era performance that was conducted and directed by the English conductor John Eliot Gardner. It features Amanda Rucroft, Rosa Mannion, Aaron James, Rainer Trost, Rod Gilfrey, and the late Claudio Nicolai. Let's go ahead and I'll talk you through some of these things now. I have it here. These are the things that I'm going to play. We'll start in Act 1 with the opening trio, a duet and a quintet, and then I'll play sound clips of some arias and then clips of a couple of duets from Act 2. So Così starts with 3 trios, which is really odd. It took me a while to figure out what was going on in them, but something to know about Mozart and da Ponte is that typically the person who starts the scene is the one, or the ones in this case, who are in charge of it in some way. So the trios can be heard as the three trios as a kind of argument back and forth between the guys and Don Alfonso. So the guys start the first trio, Don Alfonso starts the second trio, and the guys start the third. And it's this kind of structural banter, if you will. In the first two trios, the guys always sing together, and they sing a lot of platitudes, a lot of the kinds of things that you would read in sentimental literature about women. My beloved is a goddess who's incapable of any impure thought, or that kind of thing. So the text is full of these platitudes. And then Mozart, who in his music sometimes plays to the text, excuse me, and sometimes plays against it, in this case plays right to it by having the men sing identical music. They're completely indistinguishable from each other. And the things they're saying about their lovers are also completely indistinguishable from each other. Mozart's music underscores that. So let's hear and watch a clip now from that opening trio. They're interrupted now by Don Alfonso, and we can tell he's interrupting because he sings different music. If he were going along with them, he'd sing the same thing. They sing absolutely together, again, underscoring the fact that they're almost interchangeable. And so on. It's a wonderful trio. All of them are, I almost said duet, because it strikes me as a duet between these indistinguishable men and Don Alfonso. Anyway, three pieces to give a listen to before viewing the opera in its entirety. We hear Mozart doing something similar with this duet that introduces the female characters, Fiordiligi and Dorabella, who again sing almost indistinguishable music. It's their similarities, or their the sense of them as types, as stereotypes, as opposed to humans, is underscored in this production by costuming them identically. and so on. You may notice that this particular Fiordiligi and Dorabella sound really similar. Their voices have a very similar color, very similar timbre. And I am confident that was done on purpose as well. These singers are both sopranos. It's something that's not commonly done today, but would have been common in Mozart's time, something else to hold on to until later. Their vocal lines are very, very similar. They're slightly more distinguished here than the men are in their opening trio. But anyway, we hear more of this kind of thing in the quintet, where the men come in and say they're leaving. Here we see the sentimental education unfold further in a couple of ways. One is that the men walk in with these halting steps, and Mozart creates this music that's very exaggerated for them to sing about how difficult it is to approach the women and to leave. The women, when they begin to sing, they sing absolutely together, again, as if they're a stereotype, indistinguishable from each other. The men, interestingly, their complicity in this whole ruse is demonstrated right away, where the thing that they sing that's the most spontaneous, not this like constructed, oh, I'm walking so slowly, is when in these asides to Don Alfonso, they say, oh, look at how sad they are. They're never gonna cheat on us, or whatever exactly it is they say. In doing that, there's this really clear division made between these sentimental women, these women who have these keen feelings, and these men who don't, which is important too, because in the culture of sensibility, it was women who were supposed to be very keenly emotional, and that's depicted here in this video, in the composition, in the quintet. Right, so the sisters sing together, and now the lovers are going to sing together as well. Again, this is Mozart and Da Ponte showing you that they're stereotypes. They haven't come into their real sentimental selves yet. Right, it's sort of funny, but it's really awful too. Here, their lovers are prostrate at their feet saying, don't leave, don't leave. And what do? They turn and look over their shoulders at Don Alfonso saying, what did I tell you? So it's not clear yet what the true sentiment is between and amongst these people, and what acts upon it. But from the very beginning, Mozart and Da Ponte are critiquing it. So after all of these initial ensembles, well, there is an aria, a very short one for Don Alfonso, in which he pretends to be in anguish over the imminent parting of the lovers. But then each of the other characters has an aria in Act One. So after they're presented as stereotypes, what's important about this is that each of the characters begins to emerge as an individual through these arias. So I thought I'd play a short clip of each aria for you now so we can start to hear what those individual characters are. Dorabella emerges as a kind of spirited, prone to strong feeling, maybe strong-willed character through this aria that has these big leaps and travels all over the place. So again, an aria that just travels everywhere. The pitches are up and down and all over the place, but in a very kind of lyrical way, in contrast with the aria Fiordiligi, Come Scoglio, which means like a rock. She expresses her constancy as opposed to her strong emotion. Strong emotion is one aspect of sentimentality, of sentimental culture. Constancy is another. So we start to see the ways in which these two sisters are distinguished from each other. I should mention too, the recording I'm playing these excerpts from is the earliest complete recording of Così tutte that was made in 1935, conducted by Fritz Busch, leading the Glyndebourne Symphony Orchestra. It's not Symphony Orchestra, the Glyndebourne Orchestra and Chorus, with a cast of singers who were active obviously before the Second World War. So here's the beginning of Come Scoglio. It's characterized by huge leaps in tessitura in range from high pitches to low ones and back up again, which Mozart almost certainly did to suit the particular talents of the singer who created the role, a woman named Adriana Ferrarese del Bene. I'm just going to stop that because I think I forgot to, and it does go on for quite a while. But you hear in this the kind of strictness, the constancy, her adherence to something, to her fidelity that again is a part of this culture. As far as Guglielmo, he's depicted as the most cliched of the four. He's depicted as the most cliched. He has his arias feature things like patter, which is buffa, and also feature things like patter, and also things like horn calls. And this first aria has a lot of horn calls in it. I'll play it for you now, part of it.
Siate ritrosi, quieti vezzosi, dolati amorosi, vibrazione
So the horn call is that ba-dum, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, that kind of motif. So Guillermo is depicted as a kind of stereotypical guy, as opposed to Ferrando, who's depicted as being much more sentimental, as we hear in this lyrical this lyrical aria. Here's the beginning of it. I'm seeing things pop up in the chat about the sound being hard to hear, for which I apologize. Those are the last recordings I have, so I'm hoping that these video recordings will be, that the sound will be clearer. Let's go to these last couple of excerpts now. These are from the second act. So at this point, these are the duets in which the sisters trade partners, in which they allow themselves to be seduced. These are the duets, particularly the one that I'm about to play, that are the reason that people have said that Mozart's music redeems this subpar libretto and this terrible story. This duet between Guillermo and Dorabella is arguably some of the most beautiful music that Mozart has written. And yet everything that engenders it is false. The male lover knows himself to be falsely wooing this woman, who yet has this very real response, as we hear in the aria.
Io mi sento sì male anima mia, di morire. Scrivelo assai più forte, studi e fatosi, non di belli amorosi. Ingrata, voi burlate, ed intanto mi muovo. Sono stato, vediamo insoliti. E via non fate. Io mi muovo crudele, voi burlate.
So you get the way the scene is set. Here's where the gorgeous duet music starts. Right about here. Oh, sorry about that. Let's go back and we'll do that again. One more time. John has very kindly asked me to double check one thing on my end to see if we can't troubleshoot some of the issues with the sound. So just give me one moment to do that. John, all the settings are the same as what we did yesterday, so I'm not sure why it's going in and out. I'm terribly sorry, everybody. I'm going to try one thing to see if it changes things.
Rebecca, it appears that you're frozen, at least to me and Teddy. Are you still with us? Hi, everyone. My apologies for the technical difficulties. It appears that our speaker, Rebecca, lost connection for a moment, and here she's back. Hi, Rebecca. You're muted.
Thank you. Hopefully the connection will be better now. There's one thing I was able to troubleshoot on my end. Sorry that that I got dropped though.
Thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you. So let's get right back to where we were in this gorgeous music. Hang on a second. Okay. So picking up where we left off. I have a feeling. Okay, let's see if I can solve all of these issues all at once. I'm glad you were able to hear that last duet. Let's see if we can hear and see the last one that I'm planning to play, which is this one. This is the duet between Fiordiligi and Ferrando. It takes that long for her to finally succumb to Ferrando's advances. And again, we hear this gorgeous music by Mozart, which softens the blow for us as the audience. finally do sing together, it's again this very, very gorgeous duet texture. And it's here when they start to sing together that the seduction is complete, that we hear that the seduction is complete. So what has happened here exactly? Well, normally in a sentimental plot, the feeling that these women are susceptible to would engender constancy. It would engender fidelity. But Mozart and Da Ponte have turned that on its head by demonstrating that the women's strong feelings are pitted against the vows of constancy that they were meant to support. And in this way, the plot is ironic, darkly funny, and very uncomfortable. At the same time, the music softens the blow by engaging our sentiments, the sentiments of the audience as well. So with that, I'd like to talk about something that has a more personal source than sentiment, which was pervasive in the culture, which has to do with mesmerism. And for this, I'm going to focus on just one segment of a single scene, which is in the Act 1 finale, the part where the two Albanians, the two lovers in disguise, take poison and collapse. So the girls call for their maid Despina and ask her to run and fetch a doctor. Well, as you'll see, the doctor who returns is actually Despina in disguise. And this doctor claims that she can cure any illness by magnetism. It's a long scene, and we'll watch just the part where Despina, dressed as the doctor, enters and cures the Albanians. And here's that part of the scene. exaggerated sighing is written right into the music. And now here comes the doctor.
Ecco il medico, signore belle, le spine basse che ti son belle. Salvito vobili, buone, buoni, andiamo in quanto che non sappiamo. Oh, piccolo bagno, non che vogliamo, sapere calmare, sotto quel barco, non di quel barco, sotto quel barco. Tanti linguaggi, pezzi concerti, quei miserabili, per ora osservi, presa al lui tosto che si può far. Si può dottore, che si può far, sapete soldi, parliamo a cartoni, più che cilindri, le noccioli, se carina, o figlia, se poca, o nota, se non la vuoi far, o per in più. Resuona senico, signor dottore, rimette però, la causa vuole che non so se sei una ragione, non mi toccate, non mi turbate, non mi turbate, non mi appannate, non mi appannate, non mi turbate, metto la prova di mia virtù. E io t'appello, andiamo a formica. Questo è quel pezzo, amica, amica, che con me s'america, che
So what's important about this scene, a couple of things. One is that it's the turning point in the drama. It's the moment when the girls' feelings towards the men begin to soften. And as such, it's the moment when the cliches and the platitudes start to subside and their true feelings begin to emerge. This is half of the crux of the opera, the drama part of the dramedy. But the other half, the squirm part, is the bitingly ironic element to the girls' education. While the feelings that emerge from this education are real, the premise that it's based on is entirely false. And it's encapsulated brilliantly in the scene that we just watched, right? Where we see a fake doctor called in to falsely administer a questionable medical treatment, more on that in a moment, to two men who are in disguise, who have swallowed fake poison in order to pretend that they are dying of love, which is doubly ironic because to die of love was a common metaphor in sentimental literature. So this description alone explains plenty about how this scene functions in the opera. But there's actually more, and it's largely encoded in a seemingly small detail, which is Dr. Despina's use of mesmerism to cure the two Albanians. So I'll explain this briefly. You may know that Franz Mesmer was a German physician who in the mid-18th century theorized that all objects, animate and inanimate, were interconnected by energy that he called animal magnetism. He trained and subsequently practiced in Vienna for many years and was acquainted with both Haydn and Mozart, among many others. And in 1780, he moved to Paris, where he attracted a large and devoted following. Now, among Mesmer's Parisian devotees was a Swiss banker whose name was Guillaume Kornmann. And Kornmann was a Swiss banker living in Paris, and in the early 1780s, his much younger and very beautiful wife began an extramarital affair. So possibly in an attempt to save face, Kornmann, who was a devoted mesmerist, initially acquiesced to the alliance, thinking that Dr. Mesmer would be able to cure his wife of her attraction using animal magnetism. When the cure failed, however, he changed his tune and he had his wife thrown into a prison for whores and prostitutes. Friends of hers who were justifiably horrified appealed to the most powerful person they knew and asked him if he would please use his influence to secure Catherine Kornmann's release. And that person who they appealed to was none other than Pierre Beaumarchais. Yes, that Beaumarchais, the one who wrote the trilogy of plays comprising The Barber of Seville, The Marriage of Figaro, and The Guilty Mother. Now, this is an amazing coincidence, to be sure, but that in and of itself is not how we're going to connect the dots from Corman to Da Ponte and Mozart. Actually, the connection was made through different means via the man at the center of this picture, and that is the composer Salieri. It's now fairly well known that Salieri, Mozart, and Da Ponte were all quite well acquainted with one another. Salieri and Da Ponte had become friends in the mid-1780s in Vienna. In that year, they collaborated for the first time on an opera project. And in the summer of 1787, Da Ponte was working simultaneously with both composers. He was translating a libretto for Salieri while also collaborating with Mozart on Don Giovanni. So it seems plausible that ideas for Così may have actually germinated during collaboration between and friendly conversations among the three men. Now, this idea is supported by the fact that Salieri was the intended composer for Così fan tutte. He actually began work on the music, setting some of the musical numbers. At some point, though, he abandoned the project, and eventually it went to Mozart, and Da Ponte's libretto was eventually set by Mozart. But let's return now to the Kornmann affair and how mesmerism got into the Così libretto. Just before the translation project began, from December of 1786 to June of 1787, Salieri had been in Paris collaborating on an opera with, no, it can't be, yes, it's Beaumarchais. And he's staying in the Beaumarchais apartment in Paris, and the Kornmann scandal has dragged on this entire time. It's dragged on to the point where Kornmann and his associates are engaging in this really bitter pamphlet war with Beaumarchais, decrying Beaumarchais for continuing to represent Kornmann's estranged wife, and going so far as to set some of the music that Salieri was writing in this opera with Beaumarchais, writing new words for it to mock Beaumarchais. All of this is going on. Salieri's horrified because he thinks Beaumarchais is a lovely human and he can't believe how badly he's being treated in this Kornmann scandal. And so it seems quite possible that the mockery that's made of mesmerism actually has to do with Salieri's association with Beaumarchais and the whole Kornmann affair. Now, lest you think that I'm taking this too far, let's have a look, before we conclude for today, let's have a look at the names of the lovers in Così. You may remember I mentioned that the name of the baritone lover, Guglielmo, is spelled in a kind of odd way. And in fact, in modern editions, it's been standardized to Guglielmo, which is the most common Italian spelling and pronunciation of the name William. Now, excuse me, that alone isn't really enough to link Guglielmo with Guillaume Corman, but it's a good start. In fact, Mozart, in some of the very earliest sources, spells Guglielmo with two L's, and Da Ponte too, making it seem as if Guglielmo really is fashioned after Guillaume Cornman. That isn't necessarily enough, but if we consider that Guglielmo's arias depict him as a kind of blunt object of caricatured masculinity, and then we start to look at the other names, Remember that Guillermo is ultimately paired with Dorabella, a character whose name can be construed as meaning the one who's beautiful for now. She's the beauty of the moment. She's the beauty for now. Her beauty's fleeting. It's not constant. We're not sure, but it's some version of that. As opposed to the woman who he had initially been connected with, and that's Fiordiligi, which is the Italian for the French fleur de lis. And I don't think it's an accident that fleur de lis here is French. In Italian, this would translate as flower of constancy, of steadfastness, or a noble flower. And it's also maybe not an accident that the lover whom Fiordiligi is ultimately paired with is Ferrando, whose name is a cognate of the Latin word for iron, which is magnetized in order to create this animal magnetism. So this name stuff I think is pretty nifty, but so far my description of it places it in a separate category from the issues around sentimentality. However, I think the two topics are connected. According to the scholar Sarah Mazza, Kornman and his associates believed in what they called the simple values of nature and the family. They argued that, true morality, I'm quoting now, was the expression of natural family bonds, which were themselves a form of magnetic harmony. And so they were allied not only against Beaumarchais, because of his defense of Kornman's wife, but they were allied against him because of the themes of immorality that were present in some of his plays, like Figaro, which revolves around adulterous relationships. So Mozart and De Ponte picked this up in their opera, right? It's a satire of Kornman and that's the position of Kornman and his associates, insofar as the plot of Così disrupts the attractions that have the couples in their original bonds, and put them into new relationships without, though, dissolving any kind of permanence of their relationship. So knowing these things about sentimental culture and the specifics of what may have inspired De Ponte and Mozart via Salieri helps us to see this opera, this dramedy, as a product of its own culture, one that actually should make us squirm because there are many things in it that are very uncomfortable. So to return to the question that Peggy asked initially, do Così fan tutte? Are all women like that? Do all women do it? It's a tough question to answer. It's really loaded in this opera, isn't it? Because the idea, I think that we are cultured to think of when we hear the title is, are all women unfaithful? But actually, the question maybe is, do all women have depth and constancy of feeling? Dorabella represents intensity of feeling. Fiordiligi represents constancy. Maybe they both represent depth. But because they're made the objects of seduction, are all women like that? Like what? It's hard to answer. Again, I believe that the translation on the San Francisco Opera website suggests that the production will be directed in such a way that the ending is ambiguous and that we are left to squirm a little bit. And I hope that the sources that I've shared with you have brought some of that squirming out into the light where it belongs, because this is an opera that's designed to make us laugh, to make us squirm, and to also make us feel very deeply through Mozart's music. And for all of that, I thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your fascinating presentation. And thank you to you and our audience for rolling with the slight technical issues here and there. Thus is Zoom. We're now going to open it up to Q&A, and we do have a few questions that have come in. If you have a question for Rebecca, please type it into the Q&A. Just click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and you can type it in there. I'd like to start, Rebecca, with a question about the title and the, meaning of the title, the significance of the title, your thoughts on the title.
Well, I think that the title is meant to be ambiguous, actually, as I was saying at the end, that and the title also originally had a subtitle which was All Women Do It, or The School for Lovers. And so the original title included the men in the schooling. That was dropped in the 19th century. I actually am trying to remember exactly why, but it had something to do with De Ponte and wanting to placate someone who didn't like that part of the title. I guess I think that the Così tutte part it is meant to make us uncomfortable and meant to be ambiguous, and meant to underscore sentimental culture.
Thank you. Another question, actually two questions pertaining to Mozart and De Ponte. Was the 24-hour timeline of the three operas you mentioned a Mozart De Ponte convention or a holdover from the original source material in terms of the plays and stories?
So I'm not sure if it's a holdover from Beaumarchais, but I'm pretty sure that it's a convention of the opera buffa genre, that it makes things extra funny if they have to happen within 24 hours.
And another question pertaining to Mozart and De Ponte, what, from your perspective, what made them such an effective team working together?
Oh my goodness. That's a really good question. I think that De Ponte's texts leave Mozart quite a lot of room to, as I mentioned in the talk, either to support the implications of the text or to play against them. And that, yeah, I think it's partly that. I think it would be, I mean, there are things you can't change about history, like pretty much everything, but I wonder if Mozart had lived longer, if he might have collaborated with other writers of opera buffa. He wasn't in Vienna writing opera buffa for very long. The Marriage of Figaro is from 1785, 86, and then 86, and then Don Giovanni's from 87 and Così's from 89. So we're talking about a very short period of time in which they collaborated, and some of that collaboration may have been chance and convenience as much as being struck by a lightning bolt. So I'm not sure.
Another question came in. Do you have any recommendations for a book about this period or about Mozart's life?
A good place to start for about the period of the life. I was ready with an answer about the opera. There's a series that's published, I think, by Cambridge, called, I want to say it has a very old-fashioned title, that it's something like The Lives of the Great Composers. But they're wonderful because they're critical biographies, meaning that they're well researched. You're not going to find in them a lot of stories that people have repeated through hearsay over and over again. So they're well researched, and they're also fairly compact. They tend to be about 125 or 150 pages. I'm pretty sure they're called Lives of the Great Composers, and I'm confident there's one on Mozart. I have to think about the period. Let me think about that a little bit more.
Thank you. Another question specifically about the character Guglielmo. Did Mozart ever use the spelling, that specific spelling this attendee is asking?
Yes, he used only this specific spelling in all the original source material. So in his autograph score, his manuscript, which I can tell a good story about if there's time. In his manuscript, he used this spelling, or the spelling with two L's that makes it look even more Frenchy. Those are the only spellings Mozart used. So the spelling in modern versions that has the G, and that spelling came in the 19th century, but that was not Mozart's spelling.
Thank you. And would you like to share your story? It sounds interesting.
It's fun. So the manuscript for Così, it passed through the Mozart's papers to a particular music publisher and eventually ended up in the Berlin Library. And in 1941, when the British forces began bombing Berlin, the Nazis moved important archival materials out of Berlin into other towns. They packed them up in crates in the middle of the night, and they got them out of there so they wouldn't be destroyed in the bombing. And somehow the two acts of Così were separated in the packing. And the Act 1 of the manuscript went to one spot, and Act 2 of the manuscript went to a choir loft in a church in the town of Breslau, which is now called Wrocław. And after the war, these manuscripts, that part of Germany, which had been Prussia, became part of Poland and was in the Polish. When it became part of Poland, the Poles took all those manuscripts and they spirited them away to a university library in Krakow, where the Polish authorities hid them because they did not want to return them to the Germans. And there they languished for about 30 years until a pianist named Malcolm Frager, I think, who was in Krakow to play a Mozart piano concerto, and had been rumors that had gotten out about these manuscripts. So he went to the Jagiellonian University Library, and he went to the manuscript section, and he filled out a card saying, you know, I've heard that this manuscript of the Mozart concerto is here, and I'm playing it tonight, and I want to check some notes in my score. And the librarian on duty that day, who was totally fed up with the obfuscation that had gone on for decades about these manuscripts and just wanted people to be able to look at them, went down to the bowels of the library and came back with these crates of manuscripts that nobody had seen for years. And anyway, so it was thanks to Malcolm Frege that scholars were able to look again at the source material for Così, and that they were able to determine things like in what order Mozart had composed the different scenes. They were able to determine, for example, that early in his compositional process, he kept switching the parts of Fiordiligi and Dorabella. He called them both sopranos along with Despina, And it didn't become clear in his mind which one had the higher voice and which one had the lower voice until much later in his process. And we only know this because scholars were able to look at the manuscripts and determine that Mozart used one kind of paper earlier in his process, which they know because of the German tour that he had taken, and that he used another kind of paper later. And from this kind of thing, there were three kinds of paper, they were able to work things out about in what order Mozart had composed the different parts of Così.
Thank you. That's a wonderful story.
Sure.
I could sort of see it as you were describing it. I feel like a film should be made about that, or a book should be written about that.
I think at this point, well, I don't know if a film has, but it was my incredible honor and joy to get to do a tiny bit of research for the Mozart catalog when I was doing my doctorate, because my advisor was and remains the editor-in-chief of the Kerschel catalog, the catalog that that's a chronological numbering system of all of Mozart's works. This is where, if you're a Mozart devotee, you know that all of his numbers have a K number, or a KV number. It stands for Kerschel Verzeichnis. Kerschel was the name of the man who compiled it, and Verzeichnis means catalog. And we did a lot of this kind of work on how we knew when different Mozart pieces were written, because Mozart was pretty capricious, and he would, in his own catalog, he would write things like, I wrote this piece in July to commemorate the deaths of my Masonic brethren, Mecklenburg and Esterhazy, when actually we could look at the lodge records and determine that Mecklenburg and Esterhazy hadn't died in July. They hadn't died until November. So Mozart was clearly backdating his catalog, because not even Mozart could have known in July that these men would die in November. Anyway, all kinds of stuff like that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Another question came in. The San Francisco opera productions are grouped together as a trilogy.
Yes.
Is there an evolution or theme or idea in the three operas that shows what Mozart might be considering towards the end of his life?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, they're grouped in such a way that the San Francisco opera trilogy is grouped Figaro, then Così, then Don Giovanni, but the order of composition and performance in Mozart's lifetime was Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così. So all of these kinds of groupings, these Regietheater productions, these productions that we call director's theater, they're wonderful vehicles for finding new ways of, new and fresh ways of viewing old works of art. But there's no evidence that Mozart thought of them as a trilogy, that he thought of them in a particular order, that he had specific thoughts about them towards the end of his life. Nothing like that.
And in terms of modern or contemporary adaptations of operas, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, specifically Così or Mozart's operas, or sort of operas in general.
I think, as with traditional productions, they can be very wonderful or very awful. And how we respond to them, I think, depends on what's important to us and what prior knowledge we bring, right? So for me, I really like a production that is very aware of the way the music is creating characterization. As I traced through that progression from ensembles to arias, and then those two seduction duets. Excuse me. So, as long as that is evident in the details of the staging, you could set Così on the moon in a certain sense. I think what's important in Così from its original context is that it have both the comedy and the squirm. That if it's all misery, that in my opinion, the director has missed the point. And if it's all lighthearted, the director has also missed the point. But then the specifics of where you set it can tease out things that we might not have thought of, or just allow us to have more direct associations, projections, reactions, because sometimes when we see people in fancy late 18th century dress, we feel really disconnected. Whereas when we see people dressed as we are, or in some other kind of uncomfortable, some other kind of thing that's close to us, we can connect to the emotions much more clearly.
Thank you.
Could I say one more thing about that?
Absolutely.
I alluded to this production, this parody of Così that was produced by the Finnish National Opera, and in fact, San Francisco's own Esa-Pekka Salonen was involved in it, because he was in Finland for the first part of the pandemic. Anyway, this production, I haven't seen the whole thing, but there's a clip of the mesmerism scene that's available online on YouTube, and it's a terrific contemporary send-up of a fake doctor recommending a questionable medical treatment. Though in this case, for a very real disease, it's very easy to think ivermectin or other things, hydroxychloroquine or whatever, as you're watching Despina with these lab animals and huge syringe getting ready to administer a COVID vaccine. It's certainly very timely, and a lot of people found that parody and that production to be very effective.
Absolutely, as long as it reflects the current times.
Yes, that's right.
Effectively. Well, thank you so much again, Rebecca, for your presentation and thoughtful responses. Those are all the questions that have come in. So I would like to welcome Peggy back to wrap up for us. I'd like to thank our attendees for joining us, and my colleague Teddy Reich for helping behind the scenes. Thank you, Teddy. This virtual preview is being recorded and will be available to stream on demand via our website, sfoperaguild.com, at the same place where you registered for this preview. Over to you, Peggy.
Okay, well, thank you, Rebecca, especially for providing so many insightful layers of this opera of Così, and to John for all of your management. And please don't forget, if you can't get to the Opera House to see this opera, you can virtually watch it live for $25. Just check out the website, the San Francisco Opera website. Thank you all for joining us today and for supporting the previews. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.
Bye.